The last book in Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire series came out 14 years ago. That's almost the same age as Jon Snow died in the books. So we've been waiting a long time, but we're not just waiting on one book. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, we are waiting on 2 books. So needless to say, we are in the thick of it. But most people, including me, every year, we have a few months of optimism and a few months of pessimism, but overall, every year the result is the same. No new book. So the question needs to be asked, is The Song of Ice and Fire even finishable? And I'm not talking about just the next book, I'm not talking about just The Winds of Winter, because that book is very close to being finished. You already know that in 2022, George Martin said that he's about 75% done that book, so he should be at least somewhere in the last 15% of that book. So the question is that 15% and definitely the big 100% of that final book even finishable? Now, to answer this question, we gotta address the elephant in the room. George R.R. Martin, or George R.R. Martin's age rather. George Martin is 76 years old. He's lived such a long life that he saw the moon landing and Skibidi toilet in the same lifetime. Pretty wild stuff. Now I'm not gonna talk about that much because it's weird to talk about, a real life person's death, and life and death are much more important than, a book series. But assuming Winds of Winter comes out in 3 years, that would be 17 years. Which means if he takes longer to write the final book, he would be pretty close to around the age of 100. But like I said in my Dream of Spring video, I don't believe the final book will actually take nearly as long as Winds of Winter. But I'll get to that in a bit. Oh yeah, and in case you were wondering, George has said that he is good when it comes to his health, so that's cool to hear. But let's just do some math real quick. The last major update for Winds of Winter was this clip right here on the late night show.
I think I'm about 3/4 of the way done. I'm done with some of the characters. The characters all interweave.
Sure.
So I've actually finished with a couple of the characters. I got their whole story, but
yes,
not others.
10 years to go 75% of the way through means
that's depressing. That's depressing. Yes.
Okay, all right. So 3 more years.
Again, the update was almost like 3 years ago. And like I said in my last video about George, even after George retires from writing and he completes every book sequel and prequel, whatever, The Winds of Winter will still be the hardest book he's ever written. And I'm putting money on that. A Dream of Spring might be the hardest book for him to publish, but it's going to be hard to say goodbye to characters like, Arya, Jon Snow, and his favorite character Tyrion. But in terms of writing, The Winds of Winter is the hardest book to write because it does not only have to execute, but it also has to still keep the build up. He has to do both. But in A Dream of Spring, 75% of the book is just going to be execution. He doesn't need to add more foreshadowing, more character building, more world building, more lore, because we don't care about that stuff in the final book. We don't care about that stuff anymore. We just want to see the payoff of characters like, Tyrion, Sansa, Jon Snow, whoever. So A Dream of Spring will be easier to write for George. I don't even think it's a comparison. Winds of Winter is like GTA 6 of the book world. They're both huge projects. They're filled with murder, crime, and nudity, but most importantly, both of them are taking years to finish because the artists are aiming for perfection. Even though it's for different reasons, GTA 6 is a game, but Winds of Winter, it needs to be perfect because once George releases it, he essentially has to stick to whatever ending he's made up exactly on that day, exactly the day he releases that book. Once he releases The Winds of Winter, he can't just go back and rewrite and add a bunch of foreshadowing for some new plot twist he thought of for A Dream of Spring. George knows Winds of Winter is the most fragile book, because if he makes a mistake in Winds, he no longer has a couple of books to correct it. And since A Dream of Spring is going to be like 75% execution, George literally is stuck. So George knows he can't screw up Winds. That's the best way to look at it. The more time George spends with The Winds of Winter, the less time he will need to spend for A Dream of Spring. Or at least that's my copium with it, but you can let me know down below. But George knows that these books are his legacy.
Variety of things. Do you think that Song of Ice and Fire is the book that you've always had, or the story that you've always had inside of you? Or is it just a story in your canon?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt now that it's my magnum opus. It's the biggest thing I've ever done. It's the most ambitious thing I've ever done, I hope that I will finish these last 2 books and complete this series strongly. And then I will live another 20, 30 years and write many more things, many different things in the years to come. But I don't think I will ever again attempt anything on this scale. I mean, it's daunting. I began this in 1991, so.
And did you know the scale of it at that point?
No, it grew. It grew in various stages, but I'm certainly trying to do it in 7. 7 would be great. It's 7 gods, 7 kingdoms, 7 books. There's a certain elegance to that I would like to retain. But that being said, the main thing is to tell the story, beginning, middle, and end. Not to rush the story or to squeeze things or to do that, but to do the whole thing, because it really is, no matter how many books you divide it up into, 3 books or 5 books or 7 books, whatever, it's one story. One very complex story with a lot of viewpoint characters and interweaving, but still one story.
But is it actually finishable with how George writes? There's a serious question that needs to be asked because of his writing style. Can this actually be a finished book series? A lot of people who have read other books that George Martin has written, a lot of people have said that those endings are also like really rushed and seem like it needed more books. Now I'm not gonna pretend I've read those books, I just can confirm that, people have told me this and have seen videos on this. And I've also seen A Song of Ice and Fire fans who are a fan of George Martin in general. They also say that he does tend to have some sort of like a rushed ending, where the pace doesn't slow down enough to make the ending feel as grounded as the rest of the book. And that has to do with how George writes. George R. R. Martin, like I said in my other video, he is a Gardner writer.
You're unlike Tolkien, you don't approach this like architecture. You don't have this entire, like all the details and manuals and glossaries laid out then.
No, I have some of that, but much less than you would think. It's a much more organic process. I've often said that writers are of 2 types. There is the architect, which is one type, and the architect, as with designing a building, lays out the entire novel ahead of time. He knows how many rooms there will be, and what the roof will be made of, and how high it will be, and where the plumbing will run, and where the electrical outlets will be in each room, and all of that stuff before he drives the first nail. Everything is there in the blueprint. And then there's the gardener who digs a hole in the ground and puts in a seed and waters it with his blood, and he sees what comes up. Now the gardener knows certain things. He's not completely ignorant. He knows whether he planted an oak tree or an ear of corn or a cauliflower. So he has some idea of the shape, but a lot of it depends on the wind and the weather and how much blood he gives it and so forth. So I think all writers are. No one is purely an architect. No one is purely a gardener in terms of writers, but many writers tend to one side or the other, and I'm very much more a gardener.
His gardening is not made for an ending, because the ending he has when the book started, those endings have completely changed, and we know this for a fact. His original ending leaked many years ago, and in the original ending, there were so many things we never saw, like a love triangle between Tyrion, Arya, and Jon Snow. Yes, you heard that right. Also, Jaime was supposed to be evil and never get a redemption arc, and then he instead becomes king and goes for the throne. And the original book series was only supposed to be a trilogy, now it might go over 7 books. So that proves that his gardening might be screwing up his ending and could possibly make the series almost unfinishable, especially with how many characters there are. George possibly regrets how many characters and kingdoms and how much work he has given for himself. He even said that in an interview. And it's not just the gardening. George also talked in interviews about his POV style, and he said in interviews how other books like World War II books, they're easier to write because you have tens of thousands of historians gathering all the information. But A Song of Ice and Fire is just George.
What's so different about your literary work is you started off with 9 different sort of characters and points of view, and then you expanded that to 35. How do you do that?
There are days I wonder if I bit off more than I can chew, and where I sit around telling myself, did it really have to be 7 kingdoms? Why couldn't I have been 5 kingdoms? 5 kingdoms would have been a lot, but having thrown the balls in the air, I do feel compelled to keep on juggling them. Yes, I use the point of view structure in the books is a very limited third-person point of view. So each chapter is seen from through the eyes of a particular point of view character, and you hear his thoughts or her thoughts. You see the things they see. You hear the things they hear. So unless one of my point of view characters is present at a particular event or conversation or battle, you can only hear about it secondhand, or you can only hear rumors of it that might be distorted. That's been the structure, really, of most of my writing. When I was a younger writer back in the 70s, I experimented with other things like omniscient point of view or first person. But I settled on this, which I think is most effective, this tight viewpoint structure, third person. And I think it's the best way to tell a story because that's the way all of us perceive the story. You know, we each look out through our own eyes. We can only hear what we're hearing, and we're not God to switch between them. I've never found the omniscient point of view persuasive. But with a big story, you know, you need multiple points of view. I mean, I'm writing the equivalent of a medieval World War II. So, you know, let's say I was doing a World War II novel. How do you write a novel about World War II? Whose viewpoint do you use? Do you use Hitler's point of view? Do you use Franklin Roosevelt's point of view? You can't tell the story of World War II from any single point of view. You need all of those points of view intercutting between them to assemble a mosaic that comes close to telling the entire story. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Except the difference being that in World War II, there have been literally tens of thousands of historians who have collected all those points of view. With King's Landing, it's just you.
Well,
how do you keep it straight? How do you remember and be able to adjust and reflect the points of view and the personalities in so many different ways?
You know, I have glibly said in some interviews with increasing difficulty, but that's not far from the truth. It is big. I have charts, I have genealogies, I have maps, I have various files. I refresh myself. I'm aided by the fact that I think my brain is wired differently than a normal person's. I seem to use the brain synapses that normal people use for real people for my fictional characters. So I forget real people instantly. I will remember some guy who appeared briefly in a book that I wrote 12 years ago.
Yeah, that's a lot right there. George Martin is a perfectionist, clearly. So when he's writing a Tyrion chapter, he's writing like this. His writing style isn't the best for like finishing a World War II story, especially since we do know for a fact that back in the day, George wanted a 5-year time jump. That 5-year time jump didn't happen, and that could easily screw things up. Some characters' ending will not make that much sense because there's no time jump anymore, like Bran. Like George has already confirmed that Bran the goddamn broken will be king at the end of the books, and having a 13-year-old be king makes a lot less sense than making an 18-year-old, you know, Bran king. Like stuff like that is going to make the series a lot harder for George to finish. But overall, none of these problems actually make the series unfinishable or like totally unfinishable. They just make it longer to write. But like I said earlier, George is pretty old, but George isn't delusional. He knows he's not the youngest of the bunch, but George has talked about what's going to happen to the series when he passes away, and if he would sell the series and let someone else write in it or something.
Will you ever let others write in the world? I mean, you know, I think of the Star Wars novels that were licensed. Would you ever license others to write in Westeros?
No, not while I'm alive. But, you know, eventually I will not be alive because Valar Morghulis, all men must die, and I don't think my wife, if she survives me, will allow that either. But one thing that history has shown us is that eventually these literary rights pass to grandchildren or collateral descendants or people who didn't actually know the writer and don't care about his wishes. They just a cash cow to them, and then we get abominations to my mind like you know, Scarlet, the Margaret Gone with the Wind sequel, or these things that where the grandchildren or great grandchildren just see an opportunity to make a buck. I hate to see that, actually.
These are characters who've been with you since 1991. I wondered if there was internally almost a desire not to finish the series. I mean, that last, when you write the end, or Finn, or whatever you write at the end of Westeros, the tale, is there a desire to keep it alive?
I think when I get to the end, I may very well feel some of that. It's going to be very hard to say goodbye to some of these people, the ones who are still alive. But at the same time, it's going to be immense relief because the pressure of this, you know, I do feel a story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. And to put an end on this will be an immense monkey off my back. You know, I joke about that on my blog, about all the monkeys on my back, the projects I've said yes to, and one of the monkeys is King Kong, and that, of course, is a Song of Ice and Fire. So King Kong has bowed me down, and it will be nice to get Kong off my back and to have it done at last, and know that I've completed the entire thing.
So in my opinion, A Song of Ice and Fire isn't unfinishable, but more so one of the hardest stories to ever finish. And it might only be finished with a really, really healthy George Martin, a young George Martin. Like I said earlier, George does seem pretty healthy, so thank God for that. The book series might be coming out soon. And being healthy isn't just good for the book series, it's just good in general for him. But as time goes on, I don't blame people for thinking that this series is actually unfinishable, especially considering that the Game of Thrones TV show also fumbled that ending, even though George wasn't even there. If someone can fumble an ending with the biggest show in the world, possibly having the greatest author in the world helping you, he can definitely fumble his own book too, even though he wasn't working on the last couple of seasons. Am I counting on it? No. I truly do believe if George didn't have 100 distractions every day, we would have had both books by now already. So I honestly think if George really wanted to get both books out in the next 6 years, I think he can do it. There's just way too many distractions for him though. So I think the answer is no, the books are very far from unfinishable in my opinion, but at this point even George might think they're unfinishable. Let me know down below what you think. And yeah, I got my voice back finally, I'm no longer sick. So yeah, see y'all in the next one. Make sure to like and subscribe.